we've had it.
Hello, guys. This is Robert Yoho, and this is the Surviving Healthcare Podcast, and I have two of my close friends here, May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hindmarsh.
Sorry.
Man, get it right. Third time's a charm.
Anyway, they're in their home studio, and they're going to tell us about their practice, and they managed to treat COVID properly and do the right thing for their patients the entire last 2 years. And they're in Portland, Oregon, of all places. So they managed to get through the politics up there, right?
Well, not Portland. I denounce myself to be ever associated with Portland, Oregon.
Sorry.
But we are from Oregon, and we basically say we're in the Willamette Valley. The I-5 corridor between Portland and Eugene is the best. We're 2 hours from Portland, so
They're wonderful Canadians, and we love our Canadians in America. They're like Midwesterners. They're idealistic. They talk and speak as they mean, and they tell the truth and so on. So that's my feeling about you guys.
well, what you see is what you get with us, and what you hear is what you get.
Yeah,
we're pretty transparent, and we're like this at work, and we're like this with our colleagues and friends. I mean, we hope that we're just down to earth, honest, and keep it.
I think we're more like the Canadian truckers, though, than like a blackface.
So you guys, tell me about your practice before we start in on any of our rants, and we could rant the whole session, but tell the viewers or the listeners about your experience during the COVID and how you figured it all out and so on.
Okay, so I can start, I guess. So we had worked in two corporate jobs, one for 25 years and another one for about 2. We were at our last corporate gig for working urgent care when COVID hit.
And your family practitioners?
Yeah, family practitioners doing urgent care. So the thing that was interesting, I thought that actually this, because nobody really knew what to do. There's directives from the CDC and whatnot, and nobody really knew, okay, how do you run a medical practice during COVID? So that actually was quite interesting. And I thought that this organization we worked for did a pretty good job, because what they did is they separated all the respiratory patients from all of their regular patients. So because we were doing urgent care, we basically were burdened with dealing with all of the respiratory people. And so we did tons of telehealth, and most of it was, this kind of nothing works, give me a call or go to the ER when you turn blue. I mean, that's where we started. And that was the beginning of the journey. And then, looking at mRNA technology, I'm like, well, this is super fascinating. I mean, we might be able to treat, diabetics with this. You implant a gene for insulin, or you implant a digestive enzyme gene, and you might be able to treat cystic fibrosis. Like, I was pretty excited about all of this. And I go, and what a cool way to be able to make vaccines on the fly. So that's where we started. And then I started to get the wafting stench of the dumpster fire that was down the street when the original Pfizer data was, or the article was released on how they got the EUA. And I was kind of like, what the heck is going on here? They did a study on 43,000 patients, and they only had 200 cases of COVID, 168 or whatever it was in the non-treatment group, in the placebo group, and they had 8 or 20 in the vaccine group, and so there was their 90% effectiveness. And I go, well, this is less than 1%. So you're telling me in the very middle of the pandemic in 2020, when they did the study in July of 2020, there was only 1% of people that were getting COVID? Like, that doesn't make sense. And B, their numbers are so infinitesimally small, you can't say anything about this. So I started asking some of my evidence-based medicine friends, and it was just an absolute cricket-a-thon, like nothing, because the vaccine's good. And it was just kind of pre-baked. And I go, this doesn't really make sense. Now, I didn't think it was particularly dangerous at that point because we had zero safety information. And so we actually got Pfizer in January. And then we went back to work. And we started seeing vaccine side effects at a rate that absolutely horrified us. I mean, I'd done family practice I did obstetrics for 12 years of my family practice career. So I had tons of babies in my practice, and I gave away, we did thousands and thousands of vaccinations. And in 25 years of medical practice, well, 30 actually of medical practice, I saw more vaccine side effects from that COVID vaccine in 3 months than I saw in 30 years in totality. And we're like, and that's when we're like, holy crap, what's going on here? And we started really digging into other research. We were fortunate enough to be able to interview on our podcast Peter McCullough and then Harvey Risch and Paul Alexander a couple of times. And we're like, all of a sudden, literally, we are on the Damascus Road and the scales were falling from our eyes.
And I'm going to jump onto that and add the other thing that was happening at the same time, because like Tim said, this new technology comes out. It seems pretty good. We were on board with it initially, and like everything in medicine and science, it's always evolving and changing, and you're testing theories. I mean, so we got vaccinated in January of 2020, right? Did I get that right?
2021.
Sorry, my bad. Yes. But while we're doing the urgent care clinic, and by default now becoming what we call the COVID clinic, because anything with any COVID symptoms was sent to us, whether it was a kid with ear pain that was just a basic earache, to someone with shortness of breath from their CHF, they had no way of triaging and knowing. So we're seeing
Nobody else is treating it except for you in that area.
Correct. It's like, oh, it's a symptom of COVID. We won't see it. It has to go to the clinic. We were at the COVID clinic, we called it. And so there was seeing people in clinic as well as seeing actual sick people and doing telehealth with these people who are frightened. People don't have COVID that are still frightened. And as the technology, is still coming out about the vaccine, whether it's going to be effective or not, and what the studies are showing, the other thing that really stood out to us was that I would say, well, two things: I do call it cowardice of other physicians to actually see people that knowingly don't have COVID. We would say, no, they don't have COVID. We've tested them. We've seen them in person with all the PPE on. It's like, it's like we're in zombie land with this full PPE, and they have CHF and they just need to be seen in the clinic. Well, no, it's still, we're nervous. I'm like, since when in the history of being a physician and in training were we this afraid to take care of our patients, and ones that aren't even a danger to us? But the second thing that was
you're a 35-year-old marathon running cardiologist, and you're scared of your 80-year-old lady with shortness of breath.
Yeah.
Like,
I call it the chicken SHIT club.
It became like really overwhelming to me. And I'm like, I'm really not that old, although we had been 28 years into it, that I'm like, am I really dating myself? And that is it new generation? It was old generation. It's just frightened. I don't get it. So the other thing that really bothered me though was the whole telling people, sorry, we'll screen and test you for COVID, isolate at home for 10 or 14, or it kept changing by the week, what to do, the protocols. And there's nothing we can do for you. Call us if your O2 sats, are below 90, or your fever is over 103, or you can't breathe. Otherwise, don't call us, kind of a thing. And so I thought to myself, when in the history of medicine have we ever told a patient, there's nothing we will try to help with your symptoms? I mean, we see people with sore throats or the flu, really bad cases of the flu, and we're like, okay, do you need a decongestant or cough medicine to help you feel better? I tell everybody, take Coldies, add some vitamin C and zinc, get your chicken soup. You need an inhaler. Maybe if you're tight and wheezy, I'll give you one. Do you want a steroid for your nasal congestion? I mean, anything to supplement and adjunct your immune system and healing. The whole time it was like, nope, nothing. You can't, talk about anything else. It's just sit back and wait. And that blew my mind, that we would do nothing until it was almost too late in hospitalization. I mean, so that was frightening. And then as time went on and more data is coming about across the world about the use of potential agents such as ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine or high dose zinc, adding doxycycline. I'm like, well, why not? We've been using these medications for years and decades, and we use everything in medicine is often off-label, meaning, you take a beta blocker, which is normally a blood pressure medicine, and you can use it for migraine. You can use these anti-malarial drugs like hydroxychloroquine for autoimmune conditions. I mean, I'm on it. And so why can't we just add it to people to try, because we know it's not going to do any harm and it might do good.
Oh, no, yeah, it might do harm, even though people with rheumatoid arthritis have been taking it for decades with
Daily.
So that happened. And I'm like, this does not make sense. Why would we prohibit us from doctors from trying everything? Because we did it with HIV. We threw the kitchen sink at everybody. The flags went off. And the final tipping point, I think, for us was in Oregon. The pharmacists were allowed to block any kind of prescriptions written by a physician for hydroxychloroquine. They had the power to say, no, I will not dispense it to the patient unless they have a diagnosis of autoimmune.
Right. But if they're looking for a diagnosis to prescribe a medication and they're deciding whether they get it based on, then they're practicing medicine without a license. I mean, that's the definition of practicing medicine. So that's
exactly right. I'm like, how are they giving pharmacists the license to make a medical decision? But B, it was really the states blocking it. And I'm like, something else is going on. If there's all this blockade to do nothing except a vaccine, then there's a lot of effity going on in the world, to put it bluntly.
Right.
Yeah. So the next thing that happened in our COVID clinic journey and what we've been doing then is, where would we go, Tim, with the story? As time evolved, we ended up leading that.
Yeah. So actually it turned out really great, because we left our second corporate job and we joined a former resident of ours who wanted to start a private clinic. So,
about a year ago.
So he starts this private clinic and we said, yeah, we'll come, we known in the community, we'll try to lend you a little credibility or whatever. And so at that point, that was just after Texas and Florida had basically set up pup tents all over their state and started dispensing monoclonal antibodies. So I had been doing, we'd both been doing a ton of research on monoclonal antibodies. And I'm like, this stuff is really crazy. Like, it's super easy to administer. Like Regeneron, the stuff that Trump got, you can give it subcutaneously. Like, you literally should be, you
could do home visits.
It's just the antibody. There's no spike protein. There's no vaccine. There's no mRNA. There's like, it's just, and we've been using monoclonal antibodies in all areas of medicine for decades now. I'm like, this is really cool stuff. So somehow by like magic, the ultra blue state of Oregon decided that they would start dispensing monoclonal antibodies. So our little dinky clinic in a town of 11,000 people decided we'd just ask. Like, all they can say is no. Well, they started sending it to us. Yeah. So we started treating people, and we started treating people aggressively, and we became really successful. We had people coming from, Vegas.
Wow.
Idaho,
because they knew they could
California.
get treatment, and they knew two things. One, we would see them even if they were sick, because we weren't scared of COVID. And number two, we would treat them if they, met the criteria for treatment. And three, if they didn't meet the criteria, they weren't going to get sick enough where monoclonals made sense, we would tell them other things that they could do. And so it was fascinating. Like, I really felt like I was a member of the French Resistance in 1942, because one of our colleagues that we work with, he's like, well, we should be doing more ivermectin or more hydroxychloroquine. And I go, why? All it's going to do is attract attention, and we're going to get shut down, and it's not going to work. I said, the state is giving us EUA approved drugs that work better than probably any other drug for COVID. These drug companies are continuing to develop new versions as the variants come. And I said, the effectiveness of the French Resistance is not punching every Nazi you see in the nose. It's to have them think that you're a Nazi while you infiltrate them and undermine them.
How many days does that stuff help after the onset of symptoms?
It depends. It depends on the match between the variant and the monoclonal. So for instance, what was it? There was Sotrovimab was the one that worked best for the original Omicron variant. And it was pixie dust. Like, it was literally, if you had Omicron and you're 75 and you have a bunch of medical problems and you could potentially get really sick. Sotrovimab worked with in like 12 hours.
Even the
Wow.
No, with Omicron.
with Omicron.
That was Sotrovimab. Regeneron worked really well with Alpha and Delta, because we basically, by the time we started treating people with monoclonal antibodies extensively, I mean, we're doing 10 infusions a day. And it was absolutely staggering because
it worked
about 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, and I mean, you had to give it within a 10-day window.
But the earlier, the better.
The earlier, the better. So we would have people come in and they would, say it's like day 2 of symptoms, day 3. I'm like, well, I'm not that sick. And in our experience, we said often we noticed that the tipping point was about day 5 to 7, that a lot of people will be ticking along and just kind of feel kind of crummy, low grade fever, not that bad. They don't have no shortness of breath, just kind of like a mild flu. But what would happen is then we would see people come in around day 7 and then just tank.
And then the effectiveness of the therapy is not as good. May actually got Regeneron. How many days were you into it when you had Delta?
2. I got sick hard and fast though. But so we would recommend to people when they came in, we would give them the options. We would say, here's what we have. This is what's available. We use the FLCC protocol as well. Big time, handing that out and recommending which nutraceuticals to take and what we would recommend based on their medical history, as well as aspirin is being an important thing.
Yeah, the aspirin was a big deal, and that was almost entirely ignored because there was a pretty good study that showed that if you take full 325 milligrams of aspirin right at the beginning of symptoms, it lowered your hospitalization.
2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, I told patients a minimum of 2 weeks.
Yeah, we would do 2 for most.
What about steroids? You give them oral steroids, you give them a triamcinolone shot or something?
So our protocol was, you come in and you're sick, but your O2 sat's good, and you might have a fever, you might not, and you meet a criteria because you have, you're obese or you have asthma or whatever the concomitant condition is. So then you get whatever flavor of the month works as far as the monoclonal antibody.
So we'd offer that. Some people, there was a few, maybe 5 to 10% that would decline, and then they would do IMAS protocol. But most others, we would say, you can do whatever you want. This is, we don't see we had almost no reactions or side effects. A couple of people that needed some Benadryl after, but for the most part, it was like, why not? If it's going to reduce your risk from hitting the tank at day 7. So if you met criteria for monoclonals, you got monoclonals, and then you got aspirin 325 a day for 2 weeks. Plus the vitamin D and the zinc, which most people were taking anyways. We used the vitamin C as well with quercetin, and then
there was a point though where
add on a few things, but you have to be careful because then it's like you're giving people so much stuff. Then they're going to get GI upset and more symptoms. And as far as adding the doxycycline, azithromycin, the omeprazole, it would just be a case by case thing depending on their health history. Now, the steroids, as well, not everybody we would give steroids to. It would just depend.
Yeah, I mean, if they were dumping their sats, if you were concerned they had a pneumonia, then they would get an antibiotic.
They had reactive airways disease or predisposed to that, asthma or airway issues. We would do that as well.
How many patients a day were you guys seeing each?
Oh man, we were seeing. I mean, it's all like a tiny. And then we're a startup, right? I mean, so we had zero patient load going into this, and we would see. We would see up to 20 COVID patients a day.
These are pretty sick patients. Everyone's new. How much does that stuff cost? And the government paid for it, but you know what the retail price that the damn pharma companies got? It was $10,000 a dose or something. That's all right.
Yeah. No idea.
No, not a sniff. I mean, it's an infusion of monoclonal antibody. You see what they pay, what retail is for most monoclonals for other diseases, and it's
10,000 plus per dose.
I would have to say the irony about the whole thing is, so our close by hospital system near to us did have some monoclonal antibodies. We heard from some patients say that, well, I went to the ER and they said I wasn't sick enough to get it, but my relative or friend, was super sick. And so therefore they gave it to them and they were kind of rationing it, actually not
Yeah,
getting it
or they're
early.
making appointments. Like, I mean, it was completely insane, right? Like they're making up, the people would go in and they're sick enough and they meet criteria. Well, they got to be treated at that time. Like that's the time to treat them, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, come back in 3 days. Well, no, you're okay. Yeah, you're having an acute MI, but we can't get you into,
Go ahead and schedule.
So we'll schedule your stent in, 5 days. I mean, you just like that's that's the Canadian healthcare system.
Like, good grief.
No, it was great.
But
plus, no one wanted to see sick patients. That's what
No.
totally pissed me off. Like, this guy comes in, he's a super nice guy. He's got a great job. He's got a cute little 4-year-old. And it's like, well, no one will see my daughter because she might have COVID. And I'm like, well, or who cares if she has COVID?
How many doses of monoclonals did you give patients total, do you think?
All I can see is the fridge is packed full. I mean,
how many did we treat?
How many patients did you treat over a period of 6 to 1200?
I thought it was close to 1,000. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah. In a town of 11,000. I mean, it's 10% of the town.
Wow.
And the interesting thing too, about the whole treatment thing is that early on, so we live in a very sort of red county and one of the most highly unvaccinated counties in the state. And so early on, we were seeing, we would ask, it's just a data, observance collection. Are you vaccinated or not? It was no judgment type of thing. Most everybody initially was unvaccinated for COVID, meaning no vaccines at all. And then as time went on, we started to see more and more people that had been vaccinated, had been boosted, were now then coming in.
Sick as hell because they had their immunity destroyed.
Right. And so at this point, it's just an even wash.
Oh, no, it's more than that.
I would say.
No, it went 75-25 unvaccinated to vaccinated during Delta when we started treatment, which was with Regeneron. And then it went to about 50-50 at the beginning of Omicron. And now that everyone's double and, where there's tons of double and triple vaccination, it's virtually all vaccinated people now that are getting sick because, and it makes sense, right? Because the people that never got COVID initially that didn't get vaccinated eventually got Omicron, virtually everybody in the population, or they had some mild case or whatever. So they had natural immunity. So they were largely good to go. They might've got Delta and then got Omicron later, but who cares? It wasn't, it was mostly a cold. But now we're with this sort of, original antigenic sin where you're immunizing and re-immunizing somebody to an extinct virus and pushing the evolutionary, mutations to escape variants. Now it's like, now people ask me, I used to recommend the data was still there. People were still not getting as sick and not dying during Alpha and Delta if they were vaccinated. So there were some people with really bad health conditions. I said I would recommend vaccination at that point. Now it doesn't matter who comes in. I'm like, absolutely do not get another shot. You want that thing out of your body now because it appears to have negative efficacy. Like that's the part that's so crazy.
That seems obvious to any rational observer, and the criminality that has surrounded this thing has burned the credibility of anybody talking about details to the ground. I don't know how anyone can talk about this thing in any context other than an evil bioweapon, along with the original COVID, which was manufactured also. I mean, it's a stunning situation. And the idiots who are still talking about, well, maybe we should still vaccinate those over 65 or something like that. I mean, if you want to kill them, go ahead. Destroy their immunity. There are larger chance that they'll get the severe form of COVID and die of that, as happened to several of my friends.
But
and the thing about pushing it on the kids is what boggles my mind. The kids and women of reproductive.
But you know where that comes from?
Culling the herd. I don't know.
Well, it might, but that's but there's a practical reason for that. So Comirnaty, which is the slightly different version of the Pfizer vaccine, has already been approved by the FDA. So they could sell Comirnaty. They can sell it as a fully approved vaccine because it's fully approved, but they won't. And there hasn't been I don't think there's been a single dose of Comirnaty that's been used in the United States. They're using all of the EUA vaccine. And the reason they're using the EUA vaccine is because they have liability protection. So my understanding, and again, I could be wrong. If somebody wants to prove me wrong, that's fine, is The reason they're going after kids is if the vaccine becomes a mandatory childhood vaccine, then it extends their liability protection, and then they can take their fully approved community and just give it to everybody.
Well,
so
I've heard that story, and I think it's true. I mean, we're all hoping that these court cases that are being pressed, there's a fellow named who's got a hold of the attorney general in Utah, this fellow from Florida. I'm blocking on his name, but he supposedly has
Latipo, something like that.
No, that's the health commissioner in Florida, but the guy David Martin is pushing the case in Utah, and we're all praying that one of these cases breaks open the logjam so we can just utterly destroy all these people that have pushed this dystopian bioweapon on us. That's my feeling about it. I'm not shy about telling my feelings.
Well, no, and the thing that we interviewed Sasha Latipova. I'm not sure if you know who she is. And that would be another guest you would love to have on your show, or you can repurpose our episode and put it on yours, because that episode, I mean, we've interviewed some really cool people, like, top fuel dragster champion who's had medical problems in the past, and Eddie Braun, who is a stuntman for 43 years, and all about his injuries and his ability to take his gigantic man-sized testicles and put them into the cars and crash them. And I'm telling you, Sasha was probably the biggest mind blower, because she had run two pharma companies that were the subcontracting pharma companies that do research and then take the research and present it to the FDA. So just as kind of a little background for our listeners, how pharma works is you have a gigantic pharma company like Lilly or Pfizer or whatever, and they own a molecule. So they own molecule X, and they think molecule X, because of basic research, does something. Okay. But they need to prove it, and then they need to prove it to the FDA, and they need to get approvals. So the big pharma company is essentially a manufacturing and marketing system. They're not really a research system. So they reach out to these subcontracting companies, and the subcontractors, recruit the patients and produce the study, and then take all of the data and synthesize the data and then present it to the FDA. So these people are intimately involved in understanding exactly what they have to say to the FDA, how they have to say it, whether they cross their legs with their right leg on top or their left leg on top, and they button up everything, and they have the T's crossed and the I's dotted. Well, Sasha was very successful and owned two of these companies. So she has since retired from that industry. So she got her hands on the first 400 pages of the FOIA requested hard data from Pfizer. And she started, she has a small team still. She started researching through this, and she was like, they didn't do any safety studies, essentially, is the bottom line of that interview. And she goes like line by line, verse by verse, as far as, okay, this is what should have been done in a normal study, because that's what regulators would normally want, but this is what happened. And the thing that's really crazy, that should really freak people out, Pfizer is guilty, was charged and paid $3.1 billion in one case. They paid the highest fines for any commercial entity in the entire, at least to the United States, of any commercial entity in the entire world. So expecting Pfizer to be entirely above board, it's easy to go, yeah, they probably are going to fudge some stuff. The thing that was amazing is she's like, clearly the FDA was in on this. I mean, the FDA was just turning their head. I mean, the way I put it is, I said, Pfizer's having a drunken frat party and the FDA is backing up the beer truck. And that really is what she found. And that's 400 pages. And there's 90,000 pages of raw data to come out.
During the hearings, Pfizer didn't even send their own attorneys to represent.
It's the FDA attorneys.
The FDA do it.
So Tim, you're such a nice guy that you give these people the benefit of the doubt. Actually, what a research subcontractor, 75% of the research subcontractors are out of the country. And my vision of these people is that they're a kid with a baseball bat and a baseball cap in a basement in Pakistan. That's the level of people they're dealing with. I mean, it's if it wasn't so sick, it'd be laughable. I mean, these guys, they've sort of given up any pretense of doing any science about the stuff, and we can see it. They give up any pretense of even faking the papers. And now, the studies show higher death rate for the vaccinated group because all the heart attacks they had than the unvaccinated group in some of these studies. I mean, it's insane. And then they claim that they had got less COVID, so the relative risk is improved. I mean, my feeling is the details like what's going on in terms of that we have enough proof to string these people up already. It's just a matter of figuring out how we're going to do it. And I'm praying for these attorneys, and I'm not a great fan of plaintiffs' attorneys because I've had experience with them. But I'm hoping that our system is robust enough so we don't go down Canada's road. I mean, it's just dystopian what's going on. And I appreciate you guys for treating. Were you able to give some prescriptions for hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, or you refer them to Canada sources, or tell them to order it from India or something, or what'd you do?
We had some local nearby sources that people could utilize. And so we, a couple people that we worked with at the clinic did kind of go out in that limb. Tim didn't, mostly because it was like, we have this massive source of monoclonals that are working well with the FLCC protocol. We didn't want to jeopardize this like almost God-given gift that dropped on us.
That's great.
Have that taken away. And so we knew how to connect people with sources to get it if they really wanted to add that to their armamentarium as well.
Well, that's a charming story. I don't have a horse in this race. I retired a year before this whole thing started, and I was busy writing my corruptions books, and I couldn't even understand it despite that background. I mean, the whole thing is stunning. And actually, these pharma companies, they manufacture the disease, they manufacture the panic about the disease, and they manufacture medications, and whether it has any relationship to treatment or not is an open question in many cases. So the whole thing is a lot more fraudulent and evil than you nice Canadians would put a spin on it. That's
the panic and fear is really, been the thing that's kind of caught my attention too, and how it's, still being used, still, gosh, what's going on in Canada right now still boggles my mind. We had family come visit us yesterday, and they are moving to Texas from Canada, but I did not realize that Canada is still locked down in the sense that you cannot leave, you cannot fly anywhere if you are not fully vaccinated. You're just prohibited to leave the country, enter the country. You can't get on a plane. Forget the mask.
It's a long border, May. Surely there's a few trails through the woods. Put on your backpack and find your way out, and bring your gun in case you have to
There's a lot of bunny and deer trails across some of those.
Oh no, there is.
Provinces.
My father grew up on a farm that bordered the U.S. in southern Saskatchewan, and they could walk down in the field and see the little 39th parallel post, and yes, there was people that were shall we say importing large barrels of liquid.
But what boggles my mind is, okay, the size of Canada, the landmass is huge, the population is not even the size of California anymore.
Yeah, it's like
and so people are mostly spread out other than the main urban centers. But the whole thing of this fear of, we got to protect everybody, because if you're not vaxxed and wearing a mask, we're going to all infect one another, and hence the demise of the Canadian.
Well, and the fact is,
man, that the fear up there is still unreal. I'm all for freedom of choice. If you're really fearful and you feel like you need to wear a mask everywhere, in your car, at the grocery store, on the plane, that's your choice, and it should be your choice. But to be mandated and to be controlled, and the vaccine passports that that they had to have even to go in a restaurant or employment. I don't even know what other country in the world still has
it's
that.
Still an experiment. Like I would get in discussions with people that disagreed with me, and I'm like, you're part of a freaking experiment. Like, don't you understand that this is an experiment?
No, you're too kind. The experiment is over. We know the story. It's a bioweapon.
I'd have this discussion, months ago, and I go, it's an experimental agent. You cannot mandate it. and then they bring up these idiotic comparisons like, well, it's polio. It's like polio. And I go, this is as similar. Polio and COVID are as similar as comparing the athletic achievements of Usain Bolt to Stephen Hawking. Well, they're both adult males. Yeah, but one guy has ALS is in a wheelchair, and the other guy is the greatest sprinter that's ever lived. I mean, just because a vaccine for polio works doesn't mean that you make some COVID thing and you put the name vaccine on it. And it's just, and these are physicians I'm arguing with, and it's just like, are you kidding me? Like, really? What about the AIDS vaccine? Oh, that's right. What about the RSV vaccine that actually killed kids? Where's that one? Oh, that hasn't.
I'm curious about your relationships with your peers up there, because I haven't had much to do with physicians, except for people that are fully red pilled for years, for 3 or 4 years. So what are these people? What are these ignorant physicians? I mean, these are the brightest large group we have in America. There's a million of us. Average IQ 135, and why? And so what's it like with these checks up there?
Conversation you had with the OBGYN.
Oh boy, that was delicious. So I got trapped in the long story, but when we were on the East Coast last couple of weeks ago, I got trapped in the Norfolk airport for 9 or 10 hours because of some travel issues. So I start talking to just some random people, and they're asking me, and I said, well, no, I wouldn't get vaccinated now. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. It's Omicron, blah, blah, blah.
And the risks are incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
I don't want to get a heart attack. I don't want to get myocarditis. I don't want to get Guillain-Barré. I don't want to have a neurological disease the rest of my life.
Right.
Well, but quickly to that point, locally, I mean, most of the colleagues when you talk about that, they say, yeah, that risk is low compared to the risk of hospitalization and death.
Yeah,
that's what it always comes back to.
And even if it was,
and how do you prove that?
Well, and you can't. And with Omicron, it clearly isn't. So at any rate, it was fascinating, because then this other person joins into the conversation, right? Because the knight in shining armor, actually a really nice lady, and she's an OBGYN picking up her son there, and she's like, "Are you in healthcare?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm a doctor. I've worked in a COVID clinic for the last 2 years." And so we get into this, and she's like, well, name me one thing. It was fascinating. She's like, well, name me one virus that's been eliminated that was 100% always a vaccine. And I said, well, and she's comparing this to smallpox and polio and all that. And I said, well, that's true, but I mean, I said, this is a different virus. I mean, this is a virus with a fraction of the base pairs compared to polio or smallpox. I mean, smallpox is probably the biggest virus that's ever infected human beings. And I said, it's entirely different. Plus, it's a pandemic of a tiny virus that spread in the air. So its mutation rate is like off the freaking chain, right? You change one base pair in smallpox, doesn't do anything. You change one base pair, a couple of base pairs in COVID, the chances of it actually having a material effect on the virus is much higher. So, I'm trying to give her, I'm being very, very cordial, and I'm trying to give her a little virology primer. Well, all of the pregnant ladies that we had that weren't vaccinated, they're the ones that got really sick. And they said that may have been true, that for the patients you saw in the hospital 6 or 8 months ago, but that's not the case now, because now it appears that the vaccine is actually having a negative effect. Well, yeah, but every single bad virus is been eliminated by a vaccine. And I said, well, what about influenza? Well, that's just because it mutates. And I'm like, yeah. And that's exactly the problem with COVID, is because and then I said, and then I'm like, okay, I got to dial this back, because I'm not going to get in an argument because the bar closed. So what am I going to do? So then I said, okay, well, answer me this question then, because this has been actually really troubling to me, is, we have a clinic where we've treated tons of people with monoclonal antibodies. It's really effective. And it appears to be exceptionally safe. And we've had those for over a year. I said, how come this is supposed to be such an unbelievably serious pandemic, and the only treatment was vaccine, and we weren't giving monoclonal antibodies to people at 7-Eleven. You get a Slurpee, you get a COVID test, you get a monoclonal antibody, like whatever it takes, because it's so bad. It's like fighting a war on the virus. Remember Trump saying that? And if we're fighting a war on a virus, it's like any other war. You don't fight it just with your Navy. You fight it with your Navy, your Army, and your Air Force. We're only fighting it with the Navy. And she just looked at me and she goes, I don't know. But get vaccinated. And I'm like, I mean, it's somebody with similar experience to me, 25 years of medical practice. And I'm like, there is, it's cowardice and groupthink. And I don't want to be the outlier, and I don't want to be the mole that gets whacked. And we just finally got to a point about a year ago where we just stopped giving a shit. I mean, that's really what it was. It's like, if they take our license, if they take our board certification, I don't want that to happen. I don't want to go through that. I'm not going to intentionally throw bombs or grenades at the Oregon Medical Board. But you know what? If it happens, then I guess it's not worth much.
Right.
Right. You're at the point in your career when you can retire on a low budget. No problem.
Hey, I'm up to be hired at any wine bar if anybody's hiring.
If I was hiring at a wine bar, you'd get in a heartbeat, May.
Sommelier coming to you.
Yeah. Well, you guys are just so charming and good natured and think the best of everyone. I think we've got a real problem on our hands. I hope I hope our system down here can hold up enough to get us new elected representatives in the next few months, and 3 years from now or 2 years from now, or whatever it is. And I hope that these lawyers can make some money on this and destroy these companies, because they are evil. I mean, it's a sad thing. And I can't imagine these idiots who are still debating the details. I mean, I read it. Robert Malone I've got more respect for him than almost anyone in this fight. And he put a post in there 2 or 3 days ago that was more in the weeds. And I thought, well, what the heck? Why are we talking about that? We should be talking about how we get back at these people who've taken us into this war. And it's anyway. So
I just think, with all that's going on in the world, and people even talking about what's going on between Ukraine and Russia and the corruption, and I'm like, look in your own backyard. Like, what about what's going on right here?
Well, I saw a very brief interview segment. I think it was like a preliminary thing for when Harvey Risch was on Steve Bannon's show, and man, that was an awesome episode. That was a week or two ago. And when we interviewed Peter McCullough, that was May of 2021.
That's early. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I joke and I say,
how the heck did he figure all that stuff out? You did.
I know.
We had him before Rogan. I mean, Rogan owes us at least 20 million downloads, I figured. But that's besides the point. So the thing that was interesting is, he's always very measured. He was always.
That's right.
We're here to treat patients. We're not here to, kick the hell out of the government. I think the CDC gets information and has because it's a bureaucracy, they have a really hard time synthesizing it in real time, whereas we're seeing patients. So we're making, clinical judgments in real time. And he was very gracious to this. And then, of course, his fame grew. He treated more patients. He's continued to research this more and more and more and more. He started to see what happened to the vaccines as far as the failures, the cover-ups, the whatever. And he comes out in this interview and he's like, no, this is worse than any war we've been in the last 40 years.
Millions of unnecessary fatalities worldwide. I mean, it's incredible.
This corruption is so deep.
Yeah.
This is more disruptive to the United States than any war we've ever fought ever in the history of the country, because it goes to the root of every single major institution that we need to trust. And I was like, holy crap, what happened to Peter?
He saw the light.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I really appreciate your time today. Is there any other theme you want to touch on briefly, or anything else you want to say? You want to talk about Florida and changing geography, or is this not related to the topic at hand? And all
well, May always wants to talk about Florida and changing geography. So we've lived in the woods, which has been really great for, until it wasn't. for the last 28 years, was able to have my own motocross track on my property and all these good things. And they always wanted a kind of a house in the woods, and we got that. And now I get to trade because I wanted to be close to the mountains and close to the Columbia Gorge. And now it's time to be close to palm trees and the beach and maybe an actual restaurant.
So you personally, you're 55 or something. How old are you?
I'll be 57 in 3 weeks.
57. You could still kite surf because that requires a body that's still working. I wouldn't even attempt that. I'd just break myself into pieces. I got a shoulder replacement, a total shoulder 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, but I saw you hanging off those holes on the rock wall. That's
the Ryan Heath.
Those days are over.
Yeah. We actually been cleaning out stuff because we are trying to move, and I think we still have some old climbing ropes and gear from the 90s too, but we haven't attempted that in a long time.
Yeah,
so good for you, Robert.
Don't take a fall on the 35-year-old rope though. That would
really.
Yeah. I was gonna say, you know, one thing that we've talked about earlier before we started recording that I would love to do another episode with you is the thing that's now happening is, are people going to be wary of any vaccine, knowing what's happening with, you know, this new technology, but now they're starting to unearth all the data from the other vaccines, the possibility of, you know, side effects, autism, like what's in all those childhood vaccines. Should we be mass vaccine or not mass, but vaccinating kids? I never thought it was cool to vaccinate kids with so much stuff at one time. You know, we took our kids in. I'm like, this has got to not be good for their immune system to, I mean, I get 1 or 2 agents at a time, but you know,
75.
4 and 5 things at a time. And then like what's happening with illnesses, autoimmune diseases. I'm still leery about throwing autism into that basket, but you know, it makes you wonder. Now, is it vaccines? Is it the change in diet and food and all the chemicals and pesticides and crop reuse? I mean, that's definitely warrants taking a look. And I think people are going to be very wary of vaccines.
Well, the other thing,
remember Occam's razor.
Yeah.
Occam's razor is a principle that says one cause is much more likely than a million causes. So, you know, if we apply that here, we've got very strong suggestions that the vaccines are involved. Now, there's no absolute proof, but the case reports of the children falling down on the floor and banging their head forever and never talking again after getting one of these 75 pediatric injections that are now required. And when I was a kid, they were like 18 or something like that. And the other thing that's obvious to everyone who has a brain is that these diseases were all decreasing radically and almost asymptotically towards the bottom of a curve of having no disease. And down here, when the thing's already gone, they introduced the vaccine and claim that was the cause of the improvement. So there's a lot of data, and I'm happy to come back on about that, but I better study it a little better so it's easier to write about something and quote people than it is to be authoritative and talk about it. But in a nutshell, my belief is that we should completely abandon the current vaccine schedule. That sounds radical, but it's actually not radical if you look at it more closely.
I think it definitely needs another look at it for sure. I'm kind of more of the mindset of not multifactorial, but that your body, you know, like with disease and illness, can kind of handle so many insults, and finally you add the final insult, and that's the tipping point when all disaster happens. And I tell people that about whether it's migraines or allergies or illness. I'll say, you know, you might say if you get headaches, you might be okay with a bit of loud noise, and then you smell someone's perfume and you're kind of hanging in there, and then you eat food that has the extra amount of histamine or tyramine, and boom, you know, and then your period, like your hormonal effect comes in, and boom, then your head explodes. Was it the one thing? It was kind of a setup, but you add all those things together and we have a massive problem. And it's same for health issues, right? It's like you're obese, well, you're doing okay, but then your blood pressure gets high, and then you add in like hyperlipidemia, and then you become stressed and an angry type person, and then you have the big cardiac event. So
I don't know any angry fat people.
I think of the changes in health, you know, maybe autism is just one thing, but I think, you know, if you've got a whole layer of things that push you
I think there's
way.
another thing though that I would love to talk about at some point, and again, I need to research it more, but I've thought about it a lot more since we interviewed at the end of December Sabine Hazen, who is a
yes.
gastroenterologist who is studying the gut microbiome in ways that you cannot even comprehend. It's so mind blowing. Her lab's in Ventura. We actually visited her
Yeah,
a few
everybody
months
should
ago.
listen to that episode.
That
We
episode
had her,
it's called Eat Shit and Live. I can't.
and her book is amazing, and it's written for lay people and funny.
But I think the other thing that is really interesting in all of this is antibiotics. Antibiotics clearly have taken what William Osler called pneumonia, the captain of the man of death, because so many people would, they get pneumonia and they die. And now it's largely an outpatient diagnosis. You go to an urgent care or your family doctor and it's like, yeah, you got pneumonia and yeah, you're 80 and here's some antibiotics and you get better and you never go to the hospital and it doesn't kill you. So that's a good thing. But the other side is, we put it into tons of veterinary, into the food supply, into herds of cattle, into every single person has to have Zithromax for every sniffle they get. And you're sitting there and you're going, okay, well, antibiotics have really only been around for about 75 years. Tons of our immune system is in our gut and our microbiome. We have an explosion of, you talk about autism, but we have an explosion of obesity. How much of that's due to not just McDonald's, but the fact that we have a non-biodiverse microbiome? And like literally Sabine she builds these maps of subvariants of bacteria in people's stool, and she can look at them and go, that person's morbidly obese just by looking at their poop.
You can look at your microbiome typing. It's like a rainbow chart. It's amazing. And it's like a DNA profile.
Oh, well, and the rainbow chart is appropriate because it is June.
The Gay Pride Month or whatever it is. So, it would be great if we had a single factor obesity cause we could treat. But the thing that seems most likely to me is that our FDA, which is so corrupted by pharma and is also corrupted by the food industry, has encouraged this lack of consumption of animal fats and more carbohydrates and heavy and so that seems more like the single cause of obesity to me in America. And it all correlates with the, all those food pyramids and all that other crap. So it would be great if it was something we could treat by eating turds. That's cheap, right? Just find somebody with the right microbiome and feed that to everybody else.
But it is amazing. She
talks about that too, about doing stool transplantation, which has how she got started treating C. diff and then saw changes in wiping out people's autoimmune diseases. And
a lot of kids, autism gets better, not cured, but better. Emotional problems, the depression goes away. Like really.
So eat shit and live is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, it really is.
But I'm not eating yours because that's just too bad.
You got
you're rendering me speechless. Yeah, but I mean, it is amazing. Like that food pyramid thing is just like you bring that every time you bring that up, bristles, because on the hair on the back of my neck bristles, because it's like you see these pictures of people in a movie theater or big groups of people in the 50s and no one's fat, right? They used to sell weight gain potions for housewives because they were too thin, and everyone wants Marilyn Monroe, no one wants the skinny chick back in the mid-50s.
That's because if you get a set of dishes from the 50s, the cups are like a third the size. The plates are half
they
the
all
size.
They smoked, which probably had an effect.
And they didn't buy food in a box,
and they ate bacon and eggs, and they didn't drink a bunch of soda pop, and it's fascinating. It's so amazing because we've been on a bit of a journey with a trainer. I just completed 16 weeks and I didn't lose tons of weight, but I completely changed my body just by eating tons of protein and continuing to exercise. Like it's amazing. Like you can turn fat to muscle. It just takes a ton of work and you have to eat right. I mean, it's not that hard.
And get on the juice. In our age group, it's testosterone. And you guys prescribe that stuff, don't you? The bioidentical hormones. Makes a huge difference.
Yes.
It's the best weight loss drug we've ever had, testosterone.
Well,
the observational studies are stunning. They continue to lose weight for a decade.
Well, it increases exercise because I'm chasing May around so much that it
yes, it does.
May, if I was married to you, I'd chase you around too. All right. With that note, I think we better sign off here before this gets any more graphic. You guys
too.
are a delight, and keep on being Canadians.
It's in our blood. We can't help it.
Yeah.
We'll get together and go to Florida together sometime as families.
Yeah, come on down to our. We'll create it. We'll create a little commune of like-minded people out there. It's actually what's already happening.
All right. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thanks for having us on. Great chatting with you again. This has been fun.